How's things? I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to me today, with it being 4th of July and party time over your way. What's going
Yeah.
on?
Yeah, I figured knock this out early in the day. We got a lot of fun stuff to do today, but excited to talk to you, man.
No, I appreciate it. What does your day look like? I can't imagine that you'll sit still very long. Is there some endurance events or any mountains getting climbed today?
No endurance events, but gonna get on the bike ride with a few friends, and then yeah, just mostly enjoy the sunshine, summertime. A lot of people, everyone's got the day off, so lots of fun to be had, some barbecues and stuff.
Awesome, awesome. Well, here, look, I've been excited to get you on, and thanks so much for coming back to me so quickly. Obviously, Instagram, the power of social media these days, you can reach out to people in all different ways, but Instagram seems to always be the way to connect. So,
Nice.
so no, this is awesome. But yourself, obviously, you're keen to come on. You've got we'll get straight into it, and I want to dive through a lot of the things that you've covered. But the 12-hour walk, your book that's coming out, the journey you're about to take with the publication of this book. Give us the backstory. Give us a bit of taste of what we should expect in the sort of coming months before release.
Yeah, absolutely. It's exciting. My first book was called The Impossible First, and it was all about my solo Antarctic crossing, which was I loved writing that book, a memoir style book. And then this book is really, it's still got heart pounding adventure stories, of course, given my life. So it brings you through me rowing a boat across Drake Passage, crossing Antarctica solo, climbing K2, climbing Everest, etc. But at its core, it's really a call to action, really, for everyone who's, out there listening, who's reading the book, to invest one day in themselves, conquer their own mind, and really unlock their best lives. And so at its core, there's this call to action that asks people to take one day, put your phone on airplane mode, walk out your front door, and literally go for a 12-hour walk, which is not just, made up random thing. It's kind of derivative of my Antarctica crossing. It's also derivative of my time in COVID, kind of being locked down and lost a little bit in my own mind, and realizing that I love technology. I love, as you said, I love Instagram. I love, being on social media, but I also think there's a time and a place to take a day, to take a break, to move your body, to be outside. And what I found is it's simple and accessible for everyone, but that day can just be an incredibly powerful reset. I'm really passionate about mindset. People always ask me, how to do these crazy expeditions. How'd you cross Antarctica, pulling a, 160 kilogram sled, et cetera. It's like, it really starts with what I think the most important muscle any of us has, which is the mind. And so I'm excited about this new book. I love the content of the book, but more than anything, I'm excited about this global movement that I'm hoping to start to get people to really take that day, to take a deep dive. And everyone I've had try this 12-hour walk, it's been a profound experience for everyone. And again, it's meant to meet everyone wherever they're at. So it's not like you got to be some crazy world-class endurance athlete. I don't care if you walk for 1 mile. I don't care if you walk for 50 miles. I've had my 77-year-old mother-in-law has done the 12-hour walk, and her 12-hour walk looked like putting her phone on airplane mode, walking 1 block around a block by her house, coming back, sitting on her front porch for an hour in silence, and then taking another. But she took the whole 12 hours alone in her own mind, her own thoughts, which can be a scary place for a lot of people. But ultimately, once you know yourself and your inner workings, so many more things can be unlocked.
So it's not an endurance event. You can stop, you can rest, you can take your time, have your supplies with you, you can go into the wilderness, or you can just walk around your local neighborhood.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it literally is really meant to meet you where you're at. Like I said, I've had people walk 1 mile in 12
Yeah.
hours. I've had people walk 50 miles in 12 hours. I've had people go on, insane trails. I've also had people walk around their neighborhood. Funny enough, what I've found with it, and like I said, the book really lights you up through the eyes of adventure. So if you love adventure, I've already got some early reviews of the book, and people said, whether you're into, adrenaline seeker, armchair traveler, or, personal development, want to work on yourself, there's something in this book for everyone. So it's not as if it's an academic textbook or something like that. We're still going to get into these things, but, I tell those stories through the lens of I've dealt with all these limiting beliefs in my own mind, right? I'm not strong enough. I want to quit. What if people criticize me? What if I fail? What if I don't have enough money to do this? All the things that I think hold a lot of us back. And the 12-hour walk allows us to really get into our own minds and what I call unlock a possible mindset. So a possible mindset I define as an empowered way of thinking that unlocks a life of limitless possibilities. But you nailed it, which is this 12-hour walk intentionally is built to say, hey, you don't have to fly all the way to Antarctica. You don't have to climb Mount Everest. And look, I'm grateful that I've been able to do those things. And if you want to do those things, I encourage you to do that as well. But we have the ability to tap into our bodies, minds, souls, and really come with some profound lessons by literally walking out our front door. And it's funny, when people hear about this, one of the first things people go to is, oh, I got to wait to be on vacation. And so I want this really cool trail that I've always wanted to go. And if that's what you want to explore, I'm not going to stop you from doing that. Sure, that's great. But I've actually found that the lessons from the 12-hour walk are in a lot of ways more profound if you walk out your front door. And the question is why. So the solitude is no music, no podcast, no social media, phones on airplane mode. So you're really in your own head alone. But if some guy walks past you on the street, or there's, some cars and that you live in a city or something driving past, that's not negating your solitude. You're not engaging with them, right? You're not like, talking to every person that walks past you. So you can be you can be in New York City, you can be in London, you can be in Edinburgh, where you are, past people, you're still in your solitude of your own commitment to silence. And what I found is people walking out their front door, interestingly enough, imprints this experience on their daily life. So rather than saying, oh, on vacation one time, or when I was doing this other thing that's not a part of my normal life, I did this 12-hour walk. It's actually like, if you're feeling kind of stuck in your life, whether you're kind of frustrated with your job or just in your routine and just not getting after it, as your podcast is called, in the way you want to, right? Doing it out your front door actually allows you to kind of imprint this experience, this life-changing journey on your daily life. Meaning maybe you're commuting to work in the next week and you drive through some intersection. You're like, you know what? I walked past here on hour 5 and I was thinking about this and it lit me up about this idea. It kind of anchors it and allows you to say, hey, I can make these shifts even in my day-to-day life. I don't have to kind of be on vacation or do something other. So like I said, 12-hour walk, really anywhere. It costs you nothing. You sign up on my website, 12hourwalk.com, but it literally costs you nothing. Download the app that I've created. It puts your phone on airplane mode, but allows you to still look at maps in your phone so you don't get lost. But I kind of help you put your phone away, turn your notifications off, etc. And if you sign up on my website, I can send you some extra encouraging, inspirational, bits and pieces and FAQs. But other than that, really anyone, anytime, any day of the year. I am inviting mass participation on September 10th of this year. So I'll be doing the walk that day. Alan, if you're looking for a day to do it, I hope you're joining the walk yourself. But so if you're looking for a date, September 10th, a lot of people are going to be signed up globally and actually doing it on that day. But like I said, if that date doesn't work, literally any day of the year, there's an evergreen concept for you to take a day, dive into your own mind. And it's interesting. I know there's a lot of people listening to this that are badass endurance athletes, get after it, do hardcore stuff. Sometimes it's even harder to just slow down for a second, go into the mind, go into the silence and the stillness. And ultimately my 54-day solo crossing of Antarctica, and where this idea kind of arose from, was 54 days of me completely alone in the deepest solitude, where I had actually deleted my music, deleted my podcast. And it was frightening, man. I had, so much anxiety, so much doubt, so much fear. But on the other side of that doubt, that anxiety, that fear, I found the deepest inner peace inside my body and soul, in my own mind. And that's ultimately what I was left with from that journey. And so it's fun for me to be able to share that experience with others in an extremely accessible way.
You see that Antarctica trip, and I'm a huge fan of yours. I really discovered you and your backstory on the Joe Rogan podcast. I'm a huge fan of the Rogan podcast. And talk to me through the last 32-hour push. Do you remember that flow state that should have maybe taken you 2 to 3 days, but you just sort of head down, went for it, and you completed that journey in the last 32 hours? Do you remember what was going through your mind then? Do you remember the thought process to keep your body going?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a 54-day journey in Antarctica. What I was attempting to do was to be the first person in history to cross Antarctica solo. So of course that means alone, unsupported. So that means no resupplies. So no, you can't had a food drop or a fuel drop. So I literally had to start, with all my supplies, which meant 375 pounds sled behind me, which, if you're other parts of the world, 160 kilograms, you're extremely heavy, could barely move it on the first day. But the reason you had to have so much weight is that you basically can't carry enough food with you to survive. So after 50 some days, I was more or less on my last bite of food. I was burning something like 10,000 calories per day, and I was eating 7,000. So on day one, I was already on a 3,000 calorie deficit. So you can imagine that I was a bag of bones by the end, hips sticking out, ribs sticking out, body beat up, because you just literally can't carry enough food to feed yourself properly. And then, unaided by, fully human power, which means unaided by kites or dogs or anything like that, just kind of mano pulling a sled, roughly 1,000 miles, about 932-mile journey. And my average, actually in the first days or so, my average was like 5 miles per day. Literally, I'd be out there all day long and I'd make it 5 miles because the sled was so heavy, I could barely pull it. And if you heard me on Joe Rogan or, read my other book or anything like that, that there were some early days where I was like, just day one, I'm crying. I'm literally crying because I feel so pathetic. I'm like, I can't even make it a mile, let alone, 5 miles, let alone 1,000 miles. I start crying out there. And it's minus 30 degrees. So what happens when you cry and it's that temperature, the tears, they freeze to your face, which is like the all-time worst, most pathetic feeling ever. So I had some really rough, really low moments, no doubt about it. And it's worth saying, as you know, I ended up actually racing another guy head to head out there, which was unexpected. This amazing, badass British military captain, special forces guy. His name's Captain Lou Rudd. He actually was attempting the same world record crossing at the same time. And when I say the same time, we didn't know about each other in the planning, but we actually made the same logistic plan. There's not a lot of logistics in Antarctica. So there's like one guy with one plane that can drop you off the edge of the continent at that time of year. So we find ourselves on day one, sitting shoulder to shoulder in a cargo plane, staring at each other, no longer just racing history, but realizing we're racing, mano a mano across the continent. And candidly, he kicked my butt on the first day. When I couldn't pull my sled, he didn't seem to be having any trouble and he disappeared across the horizon, but I did eventually catch back up to him and pass him. We can talk more about that. But your question was about the end. I went through every wave of emotion when I was out there, from sadness to fear to bliss to flow state to, you name it, I felt it. But as I got closer to the end, interestingly enough, my body was in the worst place it's ever been in my entire, athletic career, fully, undernourished, body's just aching and so tired every single day. As you can imagine, I'm pulling my sled out there 12 hours per day, every single day. I never took a day off because I knew if I took a day off, I still had to eat food, and food was sort of my limiting factor. So it'd be 50, 60 mile per hour headwinds. It didn't matter. I was out there pulling my sled, minus 70, minus 80 degree wind chill, it's getting a little frostbite on my cheek and my face. If you look at my Instagram or other photos of this crossing, you start to see I'm wearing like this tape across my face because I'm getting frostbite all over, it's rough, man. It's brutal. And I've been alone this whole time. And then coincidentally, it was Christmas morning, actually. I woke up and I start pulling my sled, and I'm on day 53 at this point. And the day before, and actually the 10 or so days before that, had been the worst storms that I experienced in Antarctica, like just brutal storm, day after day after day after day. And it felt like I just couldn't get out of the storm cycle. I finally wake up on Christmas morning. Like I said, just completely coincidental that it's Christmas morning, and it's dead calm for the first time in a while. And I'm looking down on my sled, and my sled's a lot lighter than it was at the start because I've pretty much eaten all my food at this point. But I put my food, in my sled, and I start pulling it. And as I start pulling it that day, even though my body is so weak, my mind just clicks in. Like it just gets into this deeply focused flow state. And these places that I really want to explore in my mind, obviously, the external curiosity was, can I do this? Can I set this world record? Can I be the first? But the internal curiosity was, how deep can I go into my mind? I know that as humans, all of us, not just me, all of us, we have these deep powers, these deep reservoirs of untapped potential. And I believe that the key is unlocking the deeper parts of our mind and our psyche. And so as I start pulling my sled that day, I just click in, and I feel my body kind of forgets its weakness. And all of a sudden I'm kind of billowed with this extra energy, which doesn't make any sense because, like I said, I'm starving, my body's beat up. but my mind kind of overrides that weakness and I feel strong. And so as I start to be in this flow state, this kind of just deep meditative bliss, I start actually, silly enough, doing math. I start going, okay, like how far away am I from the finish? And I look down, I look at my GPS and I'm 77 miles away from reaching the other coast of Antarctica, which is actually closer than anyone has ever been. Other people have attempted this crossing previously. There was actually, a guy, a lot of British, believe it or not, there's a kind of a long, proud lineage of British guys making this crossing, attempting this crossing. A guy named Henry Worsley, who I'd looked up to, he had actually made it almost 100 miles from the finish line. He'd been out there 71 days, and he ultimately fell ill and died in a similar crossing. Super sad story. And then another guy, Ben Saunders, really prolific British explorer, some of the most proud, exploration in polar history. He made it 50 some days and kind of ran low on food and supplies and got evacuated off the continent. So people had made it, to the second half or the final chapter of this, but still not completed it. And I realized, wow, I'm closer than anyone's ever been. And then I start going 77 miles. Okay. My average distance has been somewhere around, 10, 15 miles per day at this point when my sled was a little bit lighter. So 15, okay, is that 4 more big days if I push extra long, 4 more days, something like that. And then I start being like days, okay, well, how many hours is that? And I start going 40 some hours of pulling my sled. I'm trying to do some math, like I said. And I realized I started out measuring this journey in my mind in months and then weeks, and then days. And all of a sudden I can measure it in hours. Like I only have this many more hours of pulling my sled. And something came over me in that moment of realizing, well, if it's hours, what if I don't set up my tent? What if I just keep pulling my sled? Now you got to remember, Antarctica at that time of year, it's 24 hours of daylight. So the sun never sets. Every day is the same. Just the sun is just directly overhead. It's this weird disorienting thing. So it's not as if I'm like, oh, it gets dark, I need to stop moving. I'm like, well, the sun never sets. It's calm for a second. I'm in this flow state. And so in this flow state, in this kind of meditative bliss, I say to myself, I'm not going to stop. I'm going to run out of food anyways. Like, I'm not going to stop. What if I don't set up my tent? So 10 hours goes by, 20 hours goes by, 25 hours goes by. I'm still pulling my sled. I've got this little GPS that's tracking me. And my family's back home on Christmas. They used to see me stop after about 12 hours. And then the little dot, it's so progressively slow, very slowly, but, they can look at every hour and it's like, it looks like he's still moving. Like, what's going on? Just tapped in. I kept going. And then interestingly enough, people they realize I'm getting towards the end of this journey and they think, there must have just been so much pride or the competitive nature of like, I did it, kind of feeling. And of course, I was determined to get to the end. I was in front of Captain Lou at this point. So I was, determined and proud to be the first, in history to complete this crossing. But what actually came over me more than anything was, what I call now this sort of feeling of infinite love. Maybe because I've been alone in Antarctica for so long or just so deep in my mind, I'm not sure.
Looking for love.
But I actually put my arms, that's going to sound ridiculous, but I actually reached my arms out wide and actually started repeating this mantra of sort of infinite love, infinite love. And what I felt was, although I was the most alone, literally human being, I think, on the entire planet at that point, or certainly one of the most, remote people on the planet, what I found inside my body and my mind at that point was connection to my wife, who had been a huge part of planning and executing and dreaming about this project for years, my family back home. I run this nonprofit that's all around inspiring kids around the world to, chase their dreams. And I felt deeply, deeply connected to the human experience, to the universe, to, whatever you want to call that, just a deep spiritual connection. And I've taken that sort of deep meditative bliss, that flow state, and realized, the 12-hour walk, the book, is really a way for us all to sort of tap into, like I said, the power in our mind. We might find different things in there. What I do think we find is that we are infinitely powerful, infinitely strong, infinitely curious about that power. And I remember touching that post. It was an amazing moment to finish and complete that crossing. But to kind of complete that thought, what was interesting about connection is I was in New York City about a week after completing the crossing. I was finally got picked up, and that's a whole other longer story. And, flown back to United States to do a bunch of press and media. There was all sorts of people who wanted to interview me, and did a bunch of press and media. And then I was in an apartment, a small townhouse in New York City, and a bunch of my friends, different friends of mine who lived there, happened to be in town, and they wanted to hear about this experience. I literally hadn't even been home yet. So it's not like I've had time to think about this experience or write a book about it yet, or any things that I've done in the years since then. But one of the first questions that came up from a friend of mine, you know, it's 50 people or so sitting in this packed apartment saying, you just walked across Antarctica by yourself. You know, you must have been so alone. You must have felt so alone. And it's funny, I'm in New York City, right? It's a 10 million person city, and all the people there in this room, they live there. And I said to them, so you guys all live in New York. You're surrounded by people all the time. And I said, you know, raise your hand if you know the name of the person who you share a wall with in your apartment building. And no hands went up. No hands went up. And I said, well, raise your hand if the last time anyone has spoke to somebody on the subway or in an elevator. You're surrounded by people all the time, and everyone kind of, you know, averts their eyes and was like, well, I never do that. I never do that. You know, that's not what New Yorkers do.
Yeah.
And so it was this interesting lesson for me. And I could literally, crossing Antarctica, be the most remote person on the planet, but feeling connected to my family, my friends, my loved ones, my community, etc. Whereas you can live in a massive city, and don't get me wrong, I love New York City. That was my favorite places to hang out and have friends and community. But you can live surrounded by people and also feel extremely alone.
Yeah.
And so the 12-hour walk, although it is an exercise in itself of being in solitude and being in silence and being in stillness, at its core, and even one of the chapters in the book, is about community. It's about actually finding connection to self, which I actually think is an ability to find connection to a greater purpose and a greater whole.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've got a friend. She lives locally and she has been up Everest twice. Her name's Molly Hughes. And she's also crossed Antarctica. She made that solo effort. I think she was, she'll kick my ass if I get this wrong. I think she was the youngest female to do it. But she's talked about the flow state, and she's talked about getting into that rhythm and just going, and the elements don't affect you and your body just keeps working, but it's how deep you can go into your mind. Mm-hmm. Something I'm interested in with your experiences on doing the 7 summits, getting up Everest yourself, can you get into a flow state on the mountains, or is that a different, is it because you're going semi-flat in Antarctica, you can really get into that rhythm? Are the mountains completely different, or can you find flow states there?
Oh, absolutely. You know, I've definitely found some really beautiful flow states in the mountains. You know, Antarctica for sure is unique in that in the center of Antarctica, and Molly would know this, I'm familiar with her project. It was amazing what she accomplished out there. Really, really incredible stuff. She, you know, in Antarctica, and I'm sure she had a similar experience because it'd be hard not to, there's nothing, right? It's like I said, 24 hours of daylight. And what people don't realize is Antarctica, the coastline, and I've been fortunate to explore the coastline. I was back there this year, not on an intense expedition, but I also did a couple of years ago row a boat across Drake Passage to get to the edge of Antarctica.
I'm going to get there. We'll
talk about that. Yeah. But what's cool about the edge of Antarctica is it's teeming with life, right? Mountains, you know, icebergs, some of the most beautiful scenery you've ever seen, you know, whales, penguins, etc. But what people don't realize is the interior of Antarctica, when you're crossing, you know, pulling a sled, there's nothing. There's really no mountains in most of the parts of the interior, near the South Pole. Now there's no mountains. There's nothing that lives. There's nothing living. So there's obviously no trees, no bugs, even no bacteria. I mean, there's nothing. It is a white on white on white on white nothingness, and it's 24 hours of daylight. So it's either you can see, you know, pretty far if there's no clouds, or a lot of the time you're just in a whiteout. So there's just snow and ice blowing around your face. You can't see more than just a few inches. You're just staring at a compass, like there's nothing. And so, you know, it's almost like closing your eyes. The easiest way to simulate for kind of someone in a normal circumstance is to close your eyes, walk down a dark hallway, and see how disoriented you get. You know, it's pretty quickly smack into the wall because you're just like no idea where you are. But once your body kind of assimilates to that in the Antarctica environment, you're empty with this blank canvas, so to speak. And it allows, once your mind can relax, there is a rhythm to it. There's a deep connection to, at least for me, my inner thoughts, my inner workings, which can be scary. You know, I always say it's like throwing a party, inviting all your angels and demons to come hang out. Like the demons are there too, but there's some flow states. So that's really unique to Antarctica. But I've definitely found that flow state in other times in climbing, for sure. You know, I could put to countless. One that comes to mind for me was about 1.5 years ago. I was attempting to climb K2 in winter. I think you've had Nims on this show, and he was there on that climb as well. Him and his team had been successful a couple of weeks before I was attempting to go for the summit. And I was climbing one day between Camp 2 and Camp 3, pushing towards the summit push. And I ended up being alone. My climbing partner had turned around a couple of days before, and there were some other people climbing on the mountain that were going to meet up with Camp 3, but I was climbing alone through a section called the Black Pyramid, which is notorious. You know, a lot of people say that's the most difficult part of climbing K2, is a section called the Black Pyramid, which is really exposed ice and rock on the Abruzzi Ridge, mixed climbing. So, you know, you've got crampons on, but you're, you know, having to use crampons on rock, which is kind of, you know, not ideal, but it's, you know, you can't just take your crampons off every 5 minutes kind of thing. So you're on ice and rock. It's super steep. It's super exposed, alone. And I'm not alone on K2 in winter. I'm the highest person on the mountain, knowing that later in that day, hopefully some people are going to meet me, which they ultimately did. But at that moment, completely alone. And a similar thing happened for me in that day. Unfortunately, the days that, you know, unfolded after that were some of the worst I've ever experienced on the mountain. Ultimately lost 5 friends on that expedition. But that hadn't happened yet. So in this moment, in this flow state, it's, again, extremely cold, K2 in winter at that point, before Nims and them a couple weeks earlier climbed that. No one had summited K2 in winter because it's so dangerous, so cold, so harsh, so rough. And I found myself actually taking down my down suit and wrapping it around my waist because I was warm. And I climbed better than ever on this really technical stretch of route, but it was that same feeling, that feeling of finding this place in the mind where each move, each hand placement, each foot placement, it's almost like your body sort of knows what to do before you even think it, you know, but it's this deep body, mind, soul connection. And I climbed faster and stronger and more confidently in that moment than I think I ever have before. And like I said, I have a few little video clips of myself that I took on my GoPro, you know, just of filming myself up there. And I realized I'm wearing my smallest gloves, and it's not like all of a sudden I realized that I'm getting frostbite and I did something stupid. No, my body is just working. My body's warm. It's firing. I'm connected to the environment. And I think, you know, part of this flow state is high consequence, right? High consequence, high reward, you know, high skill, all of these things sort of conspiring to, you know, make this happen. But yeah, the flow state has happened in mountains. I was a swimmer as a kid. It's happened in swimming pools. You know, it's not just reserved. And I do think that, you know, like I said, other people, to bring it back to the 12-hour walk, who have done the 12-hour walk, who aren't necessarily, you know, world-class athletes or pushing their body in these extreme places, people have come back and been like, wow, man, those first few hours alone in my thoughts, I was like, what the hell am I going to do all day? I'm going to get bored. This is terrible, whatever. And but, you know, hour 9, hour 10, hour 11, something about the rhythm of footsteps, you know, the nature, being outside, whether it's in a neighborhood or a trail or whatever, our bodies are kind of patterned to get into this rhythm and this flow. And when our mind and body can relax from the daily noise of whatever we have going on in our brains, it's amazing what we can tap into. And it's a powerful, powerful emotion for sure.
I'm getting the energy from you. I've listened to many podcasts that you're on, and you give the energy, you give the positivity. I'm a guy that looks for motivators. I like to be motivated. I like to listen to podcasts, to research, to read books and things like that. A guy that he's communicated a bit on social media, but a guy that doesn't know he's one of my mentors, but he's one of my social media mentors, is Jesse Itzler.
Yeah.
Okay. Tell me about your relationship with Jesse. Tell me about what you get when you see the crazy things he's doing, the way his family lives. I've seen you on Instagram at his house and interacting. And then obviously you've got 029, you've got events and all sorts of things. But guys like that are out there, you've gravitated towards some incredible people. What's Jesse like to be around, and what does he get from you when you guys are together?
Yeah, you know, Jesse Itzler is a legend. You know, when you meet certain people in this world, you come in contact with them, you're like, man, there's no one I've ever met like that. I want more of that. You know, he's just a ball of energy. He's one of the most creative, inspiring people you ever meet. You know, I think that you meet some people, they've got sort of like an Instagram persona or something like that. Like there's like, oh, they're like that. But then you hang out with them like, oh, they're not really like that. They're just kind of put that on. Jesse is what you see is what you get. If you go to his Instagram page, you see that energy and that excitement. He's just lit up. Like that is him, you know, with no cameras on, just hanging out. Like that is how Jesse is. And it's amazing to be around. And certainly, like you said, I remember the second I met him, it was just both of us just kind of kindred spirits. Like we're like, oh, we're going to be friends. This is going to be fun. We're going to do some cool stuff together. like I said, big group of friends, a lot of mutual friends. His wife, Sara, is also a dear friend. She was kind enough to write a blurb for this book, which was great. The blurb that she wrote for the 12-hour walk, I've got it right here. She wrote, Colin O'Brady is a fountain of inspiration. The 12-hour walk reminds us that every great achievement starts with a strong mindset. When we spend time alone, we can access our intuition and our deepest thoughts. Those thoughts are the fuel that tell us we can go the distance. We just have to listen. That's from his wife, Sara Blakey, who is one of the legends of all legends. I right here, she's founder of Spanx, but Time Magazine named her one of 100 most influential people in the world. So Jesse is quite a guy to snag someone of that level of talent. Both of them are just amazing, Sara and Jesse. They're very different people, but they are incredible couple, incredible humans. But yeah, Jesse, he's in this book too. He's in the book. Yeah. There's a chapter of this book that's about 29-029. So him and I co-founded this event series called 29-029. And what it is, and with another friend of ours, Mark Hodolik, who's been really deeply involved in it. He's actually the CEO, still running all the day-to-day operations of it. It's an event series where we rent, ski mountains from around the world. We're hopefully we'll be in Europe soon, but we're spanning a little bit more throughout North America at this point. And what it is, we rent ski resorts in the summertime or before the snow comes, summertime, early fall. And the goal is to see if people can climb 29,029 feet, which is the equivalent of climbing Mount Everest from sea level, but on a ski resort. So basically we set up this cool base camp, it's kind of glamping tent. We give you 36 hours to climb up this mountain, and you take the gondola down. So you don't walk down, you just climb up. It's vertical feet up. And it's an amazing thing. Really, Jesse and Mark, came up with the idea, and then they later on brought me on as a co-founder, business partner of them to help them build it and grow it. And at its core, and really what I write about in the book, but I opened the chapter, just because you asked about Jesse, I opened the chapter in the book with it's Jesse giving this hype speech, which is like the classic, like Jesse, the best, like the absolute best. He's like standing there. It's 6 a.m. We're all at the base getting ready to this. And he's like, all right, you guys, we got 36 hours to conquer this Everest. He's always, I love him. He's always like, I know you got taxes. I know you got jobs to go to. I know you got this, but for this, you set all this aside right now, and we're climbing this mountain. We're going to see what we're made of. Those taxes, they'll be there later. And then one of the kind of famous lines about our event series that he loves to say, we're all fond of saying now, is he's like, this is you versus you. This 29-20 challenge, this is you versus you. And the way we've set it up intentionally is to say, this isn't a race. This is not a race. We don't hand out a first place medal that says you were the first person to complete 29-029. We hand out a medal to every single person who completes the challenge within 36 hours. And we give them a red hat. We give you all sorts of swag at this event, sweatshirts, t-shirts, all this kind of stuff. But we never give anybody a red hat. We always say, you can't pay us $1 million, we won't give you a red hat. If someone's wearing a red hat, it means they actually completed the Everest climb. And what's cool about it too is that you might be on lap 8 and I might be on lap 7, and we cross paths on the mountain. It's not like, oh, I'm a lap ahead of you. It's like, oh, hey man, like what lap are you on? Oh, let's hike this lap together. Let's walk together for 10 minutes. Tell me about your story. It's a deep community. And the chapter that I write in the book, about Jesse and Mark and 29-029 is really the power of community, of really, you might be listening to this and sound like, oh, that sounds like a cool idea. Or you might be listening to this, sounds like that sounds terrible. But whatever you're interested in, whatever you're engaged in, when you surround yourself with the people that are like-minded, that you can struggle together, that you can laugh with together, you can celebrate together, that you can go through all the arc of emotions, that is what makes us so much stronger. There's a famous quote that I love, which we're the net product of the 5 people we spend the most time with. And, bring your question full circle. What I loved so much about 29-029, I love the community, the people we meet. We keep these events, intentionally small, 200, 250 people max. And by the end of 36 hours, you feel like everyone. You feel like because you're. It's not like you're at a cocktail party and you're having some casual conversation. It's the middle of the night, and you stumble across somebody who's been out there for 15 hours, and you pretty quickly get into the heart of that person, and you feel bonded. And when Jesse and Mark, after the very first event, asked me to, be a co-founder, and because they just tried it once, and we're like, is this cool? Should we do more of this? And then like all three of us were like, yes, and let's, do lots more events and invite more people into this community. But it's been a fun and successful business enterprise for us. But more than anything, I remember when Jesse and Mark said, do you want to do this with us? Do you want to help building it? It had nothing to do with, is this a viable business, or are we going to make money doing this or whatever? It was more just like, if that means I get to hang out with the two of you guys more, you, Jesse and Mark, then the answer is hell yes. Because like I said, you surround yourself with the people that you admire, that you love, that you get, you get a lot from, and that you support, that it's a two-way street. It's a beautiful thing. So I love that Jesse's like you said, an Instagram mentor. I hope you get a chance to meet him in person, at some point. He's an absolute legend. Legend.
He's on my bucket list podcast guests and things like that. I know how busy these guys are, and I just watch away. But it's how do you like this for a tangent? Because I know from living with a SEAL that Jesse basically discovered David Goggins.
Yep.
And we all know Goggins is an absolute savage and what he achieves and what he does. And you might know where I'm going with this. But the savage that, I don't know if he's still in your life, but Mike McCastle.
Yeah.
That guy, when you talk about him on the Joe Rogan podcast, he beat Goggins' pull-up record with a 30-pound weighted vest on.
Yeah, exactly.
Tell me about that guy, because that get intriguing. And another guy that's been in your world that has pushed you to the limit, or that brings the best out in you.
Totally. Yeah. So Mike McCastle, incredible human, and still a dear friend of mine. I was just talking to him the other day. He also makes a cameo in the 12-hour walk. I talk about some crazy training that we do together. So I was looking to train for Antarctica, the solo crossing. And what's interesting about, at this point, I had set a couple of world records, but I had never done a world first. And that was part of the intrigue for me with the Antarctica crossing was, can I do something that no one in history has ever done? But one of the interesting things about doing a world first, I've now done another with that Drake Passage Row, is there's no blueprint. You can't like call up the guy who did it and say like, well, how'd you train for it? Like, how'd it work? How this, let's say if let's say you're training for the 100-meter dash, like world record or something like that. Like you can go watch tape of Usain Bolt breaking the record and try to break down, well, his start and his stride and what's his stride length, those stuff. But like try to do something no one's ever done. There's like no blueprint. You can look at other people who attempted it and go like, well, that guy didn't get it right, but there's no like, how do you do it? And so what you realize from a kind of coaching standpoint, and I've been blessed with this, throughout my whole life since I was a kid as a swimmer, I've had some great coaches, great mentors. And, everyone's kind of building off the knowledge from over the generations. And that's why sports, track and field or swimming always gets a little bit faster. Every Olympics, you see a little more world record because, you see people getting incrementally stronger. But in a world first, there's kind of no blueprint. So I heard about this guy, Mike McCastle, and we got introduced to each other at a local gym in Portland, Oregon, where I'm from, where I was living at the time. And immediately, it's just one of those things. Like we talked for, I remember I set up a meeting with him. We met in the gym just to hang out, to kind of see if we might want to work together or something like that. And I knew a little bit about his story, but not that much. And it was one of those things like, him and I both described it, like we talked for like 60 seconds and it was almost like it was like, we don't even need to talk anymore. Like just kindred spirits, brothers, like just like,
it's
boom,
it's
like,
on.
It's on. Like we're doing this. This is on. It was amazing. And so he is an incredible strength coach. We'll talk about some of the crazy stuff he's done for me, but as an individual, he is just a savage in his own right. He has this thing called what he calls the 12 Labors Project. And it's a lifetime thing that he's going after, which is basically doing 12 world records or like big, badass, crazy feats. He's completed 8 now. And he comes up with one about every single year. And as you mentioned, he broke, I think Goggins' pull-up record was 4,000 pull-ups or something like that, which by the way, is like insane. I can do like 7 pull-ups.
Yeah.
And McCastle comes in and he ends up doing, I think I hope I get the number exactly right, but it's 5,804 pull-ups in under 24 hours. So he smashes the record, and he also does it while wearing a 30-pound weight vest. He also went and pulled a, F-150 truck, it's a big, American pickup truck, 20 miles across Death Valley, which is like the hottest, desert, it's 120 Fahrenheit when the Celsius, I don't know, it's like 45, 50 seconds, ridiculously hot. but he's also this like soft-spoken badass. Like you look at him and you're like, that guy, he's Navy, big jack dude, like, you know, but like when he did that, when he pulled that, I love this story, when he pulled that truck across Death Valley, you can find him on social media, check him out. Like he's awesome, but he's also just understated, humble guy. When he did that, he trained for that, told nobody he's doing it, flies to Las Vegas, which is near Death Valley, and goes to the rental car desk and just like, oh yeah, I'm just renting this truck. And then drives out to Death Valley by himself and just pulls up on the road in the middle of this like random road at Death Valley, and then just straps a harness and starts pulling this truck. And the only reason there's record of it is within like the first few minutes that he was out there, this woman pulls beside him and like on the road and was like, what the hell are you doing? He's like, oh, hey, I'm just doing this, gonna do this all day. And so she's like, this is insane. This is a random person. Is like, this is insane. So she stops and she films him all day long doing this. And so my point is like, his plan was not like, hey, let me put this live on social and this and that and the other. He's like, I just want to test myself and I just want to see if I can do this. And if someone else notices, obviously I've talked about him on Joe Rogan. People know about him now. People hit him, I'd be a great podcast guest, whatever. And he loves doing it. But at its core, he's just doing this because he's a freaking badass. So what was awesome about him, and like I said, that's this kindred brotherhood, and he's trained me for a series of expeditions at this point, but Antarctica, the solo crossing was the first one. And what I loved about him was both him and I were like, there's no blueprint. Like I said, like, you know, how are we going to do this? There's no blueprint. And his creativity, not only for his own, 12 labors, but for my expeditions is like, great, let's just try stuff and start going like, well, we can't go to Antarctica and train for Antarctica in Antarctica, which that'd be the most, if you had a magic wand, that'd be the most obvious way to do it. But that's obviously, it's not feasible. And so he's like, well, how do we bring Antarctica here? And so I gave full faith, full trust, in him. And he came up with these crazy workouts. He'd be like, okay, we do a bunch of like squats and push-ups and get my heart rate jacked up, big strength, it's on a circuit. And then all of a sudden out of nowhere, he pulls out these buckets of ice and he's like, all right, now, do a plank, but put your hands in these buckets of ice. And I'm like, oh shit. Okay. And, he's got me in there. My hands are in ice freezing and, they're so frozen. I can barely move them. They've been in there a minute or two or something like that. And then he's like, okay, now do a wall sit. And he's got me doing a wall sit, but my feet are in the buckets of ice. And he's like, okay, you can't take your feet out of these buckets of ice until you solve this Lego problem and tie these 5 knots. But now, granted, my hands are freezing. I mean, they're literally frozen. I can barely use them. And he's like, yeah, you got to figure it out. And so, I'm trying to figure out how to like tie these knots. My feet are in ice, whatever. And it seems ridiculous, but I'll tell you what, that exercise in itself quite literally saved my life. I didn't have, any extras in my sled. I didn't have an extra tent, extra shelter, or anything like that. And at the end of these long days, my hands would be freezing and I had to tie these tiny little knots and make sure my tent didn't fly away. There was a couple of times my tent actually almost did fly away. But it was badass. It was cool. And it was a way to simulate the best I could. I talk about in the 12-hour walk, there's a chapter that's about us not being able to sort of claim our identity, us being like, well, I'm not a climber, or, I'm not a runner, or, I'm not an author, I'm not a podcast. So, all the things you're not. I mean, none of us are anything until we freaking try to do the thing for the first time. And this might sound ridiculous, but I set this goal of rowing a boat across Drake Passage, something no one's ever done before. But what not a lot of people realize when I set that goal, including the Discovery Channel, who, committed a large budget to film the whole thing, was before I committed to doing it, I had never rowed a boat anywhere, literally anywhere. I never, not like a summer camp. Not that people assume when I was like, said I'm going to row a boat across the most dangerous ocean in the world, they must be like, oh, you must have spent your whole life, on the oceans or in the water or rowing and stuff like that. And I'm like, yeah, actually, I've never rowed a boat anywhere. Like, wait, what? No, I'm not a rower. But the only thing that changes that phrase of I'm not a rower is I'm not a rower yet. I'm not a rower yet. And Mike Mccasl fundamentally understands that as well. And so I came to him, and ultimately I did get a guy who was a dialed rowing coach to teach me obviously some fundamentals of rowing. And there's a hilarious chapter in the book of me saying I'm going to row the Drake Passage and getting in my rowboat for the first time and falling on my face in 1 foot of water in this river. And the guy's looking at me like, you're 3 months from now, you're going to try to row what? Like, what the hell? But I did it. And the power of that story is us being able to do it. Go ahead.
Sorry, Colin. How did you assemble your team? How did you assemble the team? Because you came to Scotland to train for that, did you not?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll get that in a second. Let me just finish this one thought, which is that what Mike did, because I gotta give my boy one more shout out, which is he's like, okay, so when you're rowing across Drake Passage, how's it, tells me how's it gonna work. I'm like, well, it's a team of us, there's 6 of us, there's gonna be 3 guys rowing at a time, 90-minute shifts on, 90-minute shifts off, etc., back and forth. He's like, okay, so you're going to be sleep deprived, you're going to be in the middle of the night, like all this kind of stuff. I kind of describe it, and I kind of can see the wheels turning in his brain, and he's just like, okay, cool, let me give it some thought, whatever. That next night, a couple nights later, I get woken up. He's in my house. It's 2 a.m. and he's shaking me awake. And my wife had given him the keys to our house. And he's like, it's time to get to work. And I'm like, wait, what? I'm out the store. And he's like, what are you talking about? And he wakes me up. He's like, get your stuff on. We're going outside. And we go outside, and he's got a rowing machine, and he's got it set up on these Bosu balls, so it's unstable. And he's like, get on the rowing machine. And I'm like, am I dreaming this? Like, what the hell is going on in the middle of the night? And he puts me on this rowing machine, gets me start rowing. And then he's got these buckets of ice water. He starts dumping ice water over the top of my head. So before I'm like, 5 minutes before that, I'm peacefully asleep. And then 5 minutes later, I'm awake. I'm on a rowing machine in my front yard, and he's pouring ice water on my head while he's shaking around this rowing machine. He's like, if we can't go to the Drake Passage, I'm bringing Drake Passage to you. Sleep deprived, tired, cold, wet. You got to keep rowing. So that's the kind of crazy, badass, maniacal shit that he's come up with. But in the end, it has worked well. But so with the Drake Passage row, there was a team of us. It was 6 of us. This guy, Icelandic guy named Fionn Paul, who's a world-renowned rower, has 30 some world records or something like that in ocean rowing. Really impressive resume. He had thought of this idea of rowing across Drake Passage, and he kind of worked on it for a while. And unfortunately, just super logistically complicated. It's very expensive. It's just like a hard project to pull off logistically. And he reached out to me and kind of shared this idea with me after I'd come back from my Antarctica crossing, kind of being like, well, you must know a lot about Antarctica and the treaties and the rules. I mean, Antarctica, for good reason, is a very protected place. And so therefore you can't just go there whenever you want. It's somewhat complicated, and particularly with the rowboat. And so he reached out to me to see if I wanted to kind of team up with him and figure out the best way to do this project. And I told him, I was like, I never rowed a boat anywhere. He's like, you can learn that part, but
don't worry about that.
He's like, but he recognized, me. He's like, look, you've gone deep into your mind, deep into your body. You know how to push, you know how to do. And I just got back from the solo crossing of Antarctica. And so, we colluded and worked together. And then ultimately there was 6 of us. So Fionn and myself, and then 2 other American guys who I actually went to college with, who actually rowed. They were great rowers in college. I was a swimmer in college, but I knew them from college. And then 2 other guys who Fionn had rowed across the Indian Ocean with a couple years prior. A Scottish guy named Jamie Douglas Hamilton.
He lives local as well. He lives just in the same sort of community as me.
Yeah, incredible guy. And a South African guy named Cam Bellamy. And so that was our team. Jamie's such an amazing guy. I didn't know him before this project, but the second we met, we're fast friends. But yeah, he's local there, Scottish guy. And he, so him and I, funny enough, I spent probably more time with him than anything, because we sat in the same seats, always on the row, and always in the exact same order through the entire time. So me, Cam, and him we were a 3-man shift, and then Fionn, Andrew, and John were the other 3-man shift. Obviously, we'd see each other in passing, but we were mostly spent time with 3 guys that we were rowing with, and Jamie was directly in front of me. So I rowed across Drake Passage, staring at the back of Jamie's head for the entire 750 miles. And he's just a hilarious, amazing guy. But we, as you mentioned, we did our test row in Scotland. And so the boat that we had found, it was a secondhand ocean rowing boat. But we needed to get it retrofitted for the cold. So these boats, obviously, mostly when ocean rowing is already a pretty niche thing, but generally when people do it, they do it in warmer environments, right? You cross the Atlantic and end up in the Caribbean, or you go across the Pacific and you end up in Hawaii, or things like that. So it's rare that you take one of these ocean rowing vessels, which by the way are tiny little boats. I mean, it was, 28 feet long, but 3 feet off the water. So, I mean, you're basically on the water's edge, open hull. You can look at my Instagram or, look up ocean rowing. I mean, these are not like big fortified boats. I mean, we're in the open with the waves crashing over our head, type of deal. So the boat we found was in a UK shipyard, and the guy who was helping us kind of retrofit it was based in the UK. And so we decided it would be easier for us than us to try to ship the boat down to South America and where we were ultimately going to leave from in the months leading up. It'd be easier if we went to where our boat was actually to be able to row, train on our boat while it was getting retrofitted, because we were doing some stuff to reinforce the hull to make it stronger, put some extra insulation for warmth in the cabins and things like that for the cold. So yeah, we went up to Scotland to Malig. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but that's where we all met up as a team. So interestingly enough, and the Discovery Channel documented this whole thing. There's a feature-length documentary called The Impossible Row. If you wanted to, on Discovery Plus, you can stream it anytime. That shows this entire crossing. But the first phase of that was, once the team was assembled, we'd already agreed to do this. We'd all, of course, talked on video calls and caught up in this other stuff. But we'd actually never all been in the same place at the same time. I knew the couple guys from college. Fionn knew the other couple guys. I mean, we didn't know each other, but we'd already committed to doing this crazy kind of life-threatening thing together. Yeah. And so we all flew into Scotland, and that was the first time we all met for the first time in person. And that was just, I think it was only 2 or 3 months before we actually started the Drake Passage Row. It's not like it was multiple years ahead of time or anything like that. So it was a pretty high pressure, high intense situation to all get together and meet up, but it was an amazing experience.
I've got a rugby background, and we call it pre-season. A good way to get the team together is to hit the bar. Was there any
exactly.
Was there any whiskey consumed or haggis or anything like that in Scotland?
We definitely had some drinks for sure. There's nothing like bringing some guys together, bonding, not just rowing the boat, but having some beers, catching up, starting to build that trust, and more than anything, the camaraderie, right? That project at its core was all about teamwork. And it's one thing, it's easy to get along with some guys and have a couple beers and have fun, but you're like, okay, in the middle of a storm, when there's 40-foot swell or an iceberg or a life-threatening situation, can I trust this guy? Like, are we gonna, is this guy gonna have my back? And to our credit, ultimately, I think we held it together as a team really well. In the end, deep camaraderie, deep respect. All those guys, consider them friends. It was amazing. And you don't always see that in ocean rowing. I've heard some horror stories of guys getting off ocean rowboats and literally they rowed across an ocean together. I've never talked to that guy. I've never talked to that guy in my life. But we held it together as a team through some really, really intense stuff. Like I said, if you're curious, I'd check out the documentary, because you see the footage. It's just that we went through some pretty insane times. I read about it in the 12-hour walk as well, just being smashed inside these cabins. We never knew each other, but all of a sudden we're like 40-foot swells, crazy storms. We got to put out what's called a sea anchor. So we can't row in some really intense. We put the sea anchor, but the boat was actually only built for 4 people. There were 6 of us because the storms are so rough. We thought in the Drake Passage we needed an extra muscle, which we absolutely did. But sometimes the storms were so intense, so we'd actually have to get inside these cabins. It's like being inside the trunk of your car. But I'm spooning, wet and cold, my body wrapped around Fionn. We're lying on top of each other for 25 hours. Oh, hey, well, we didn't know each other then. We know each other now. Pretty gritty, brutal, uncomfortable conditions. But one of the things I found, and one of the core ideas from this book, is really seeking that discomfort. It sucks in the moment, but when you overcome that, when you get through it, it's these beautiful moments. It's kind of come to think of life on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being our worst moments, are, trapped inside of this rowboat, getting tossed around the Drake Passage, wet and cold and sleep deprived, spooning a huge man. It's not really my favorite, thing to be doing. And that's a pretty grim set of circumstances. But then, think about that as a 1, these are our lowest moments. But then you arrive to the shores of Antarctica and you see the beauty and the majesty, and you realize you've rowed a boat there, and the accomplishment and the fulfillment. That's a 10, these high highs. And through all my expeditions and really life, I've come to realize that for any of us, we live this life on a spectrum of 1 to 10. When you reach those 10s, those deeply passionate, fulfilled, incredible, infinite love kind of moments, they don't come in spite of the 1s. more than anything, I realized they come because of the ones, because of your ability to take on the risk, because of your ability to get outside of your comfort zone, because of your ability to, seek discomfort. That actually allows this deep fulfillment. And I realized that in our modern world, too often, I think people are stuck between 4 and 6 in what I call the zone of comfortable complacency, sort of just, I got a job, I don't love it, it pays the bills, it's fine, 5, or my partner, like we've been together for a few years and, we cohabitate, we live together, but like, it's fine, like we all know this feeling of kind of being stuck in the 4 and 6s. And I realized that a lot of the reason people don't change that job, shift that relationship, make that move, take that risk is because we are afraid of experiencing the ones. But if you hedge against experiencing any ones, you also don't allow yourself to experience any of the 10s. And so I encourage the walk is a simulation for this. If you go walk for 12 hours, you know what? At some point, your feet are going to get tired. You're going to get a little bit hungry. You're going to get worn down. You're going to get this. And hour 5, hour 6, hour 7, you might feel some 1s or some 2s, some discomfort because you're doing something different. You're alone in your thoughts. Your body's a little bit tired, whatever. But when you get back to your front door after hour 12, I guarantee you, I've watched it, all the people have done the walk so far, the people who will do the walk, this deep fulfillment, this deep accomplishment. I feel like they've done something. They feel like they've done something different. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for stepping outside of my comfort zone today. I broke free of that zone of comfortable complacency, at least for one day. And when you break free of that for one day, you realize, oh, I can do this more in my life. But to get to those 10s, to get to that higher end of the spectrum, you also have to be willing to allow those lower moments. It's like you want to remodel your kitchen. You want this fancy new kitchen in your house or something like that. Well, the first thing you do is you rip down all the walls and you take out the plumbing. It's got to get worse before it gets better sometimes. And so the 12-hour walk is encouraging of that process in a way to kind of simulate that in our life and remember so you can apply that lesson moving forward to break free of that 4 to 6 zone of comfortable complacency.
It's a brilliant way to put it. It's a brilliant way to sum up this podcast as well, that you're a guy that has taken yourself to the 1s, to the 2s, but you always seem to come out at the 10s. So Colin, it's been fantastic to hear your story. Obviously, I followed you for years, but I really appreciate how quickly you came back to me and for jumping on the podcast. It's been awesome to catch up, and good luck with the book. I'll share it. We'll release this closer to August when the book comes out. And I hope people appreciate it as much as I appreciate you coming on the show.
Well, I appreciate it. I got to ask, so you going to do the walk?
Oh, maybe not on that day. I don't even know what day of the week it is, but yeah, I don't mind. I could try that. I could certainly try that. COVID was a place where I took on sort of nighttime marathons and got into some pretty silly situations just by sort of, we were all bored. We were all at home.
Yep.
So yeah, 12 hours walk without my children. I've got 3 kids under 8. That might not be a bad excuse to get out and get a bit of child-free time.
There you go.
I'll support it. And I know, big following. I do a lot with the adventurers and things like that on the show. So I'll try and put your book in front of as many people as I can.
Amazing, man. I appreciate it. Well, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to spend this time with you.
Awesome. Thank you.
Oh! Ah! What was my time?
5 seconds.
5 seconds. I made it. Rocky, was that okay?
1
1 second.